Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Freedom Podcast. And this one's a little different because it's just me. And I prayed about this a lot because the reason I wanted to start this was to be able to give people a platform to share their experiences and the things that they've learned, like on their walk with God. But I have been choosing people that don't have a social media platform because I think that those people have important stories. And I've been blessed with them in my life, and I wanted to share them. But all that being said, I realized recently that I really haven't gotten a chance to let anyone know me. And I think that's important because I was thinking about it and praying about it. And I was like, all of these people that I like watching their podcasts where they interview people I know nothing about, it's because I care about what they have to say and I trust their questions and I trust where they're coming from when they ask questions. And if I never let anyone hear what I have to say, then how would you know to trust me? So that's why I decided to do this. And the way that I'm going to do it is I'll still post every other week, and I'm going to do one with just me that's shorter. So this one's, you'll be able to see, but I'm imagining it'll only be around 20 minutes. And then the other ones will be longer, like an hour to an hour and a half, like they have been. And then I'll interview someone once a month, and it's just me once a month. So yeah, that's why I'm doing this, and a little bit of the background. But for today, I wanted to start with my testimony because I never really talked about it. And then I was thinking about all of the different things that I could talk about in this first one, but I wanted it to be something that I relate to my testimony. And I've been realizing over the since September, so 9 months, God has been showing me that the things that I struggled with when I was saved are still things that I struggle with. And that it's a root problem that's much larger than I ever expected. And I think that I definitely, and I'm sure other people have the idea that when you get saved, all your problems go away and like God just instantly heals everything in you and then you never have to deal with anything again, which isn't true. And there are some stories where it's like, oh yeah, I never dealt with anxiety again or stuff like that. But there's still a lot of emotional things that people and I deal with because we're human. And those don't just go away, but the whole point is that God helps you with them. So that's kind of what I want to go through. So basically, to start with my testimony, I grew up going to church, since birth, basically. And my parents are both really strong believers. And I remember being part of kids' church and VBS and all the things that you do as a little baby Christian, pretty much my whole life. And then I remember even like as a kid, like praying and talking to God and hearing him speak to me. And then around, I would say 13, 14 is I think when, for me, the age of responsibility hit where like it was no longer my parents' faith and had to become my own decision because I had enough maturity to be able to make that decision for myself. And I didn't. So from ages 13 to 17, so that was middle school and high school. I graduated high school when I was 17. I still studied the Bible. The homeschool thing that I did was Christian based. I really knew the word and I knew the Bible because my mom was also really, really good about making us do Bible study every morning as part of our school day, and I was homeschooled. So that was how you start the day, and it didn't matter how long it took to get through it. That's what we started with. So I had a really good understanding of the Bible. I knew yeah, God loves me. Yeah, Jesus died for me. Yeah. And I knew all the stories, all the things. But I wasn't really living that way. I wasn't living a surrendered life. And it's hard because I've talked to my family about this and I've talked to other people, and a lot of people have argued me and been like, well, you were still saved. It was just you walked away for a little bit. And I can say this only because it was my life. Everybody's life is different, but I don't believe that I was saved because I think I was saved up until 13 because there's an age of responsibility and it was under my parents. But just because I knew who Jesus was doesn't mean that I knew him on an intimate level. And being saved is about Jesus being your Lord and Savior. And I was super cool with the whole Jesus died for me thing but not really cool with the living a surrendered life because he's my Lord thing. So all my reasons for doing anything were all self-preservation and pride-based. I would do things because it would make me look better. I had no problems with lying or getting away with stuff. And I wasn't even a bad kid. I still lived the good Christian life, but my reason and my heart posture for doing everything was self-preservation and pride. So all that to say, I wasn't saved from 13 to 17. And then when I was 17, I was dating this guy in high school, and it was really bad. And it's not even that he was a terrible person, because we were 17. It was really just, it was on me. I wasn't even supposed to be dating, and I went behind my parents' back and did it anyway. And it was all the things that I did was based out of insecurity and because I wanted to be desired, and I wanted all of these things that I wasn't getting because I wasn't in relationship with God. And it hurt a lot because those things fall apart when they're not God. So it was a year between when I was 16 and 17 that I was on again, off again with this guy. And he did hurt me a lot, but it's not that I don't have any anger, It's really just that I was trying to fill a God-sized hole with a person, and that is always going to hurt because it doesn't work. So I vividly remember driving home from seeing him one day after we had decided we weren't going to date, and I was just so heartbroken, just so upset. And I was sobbing on the way home in the car. I was driving by myself, and I was about to turn into my neighborhood where my parents lived. And I just broke down, and I cried out loud to God. And I was like, God, I just can't do it anymore. I've tried this for years, doing it my own way. And I really totally thought I knew how to do this on my own. But I realized I don't, and I don't want to do it anymore. Please just take control of my life. And as soon as I said that out loud, that I wanted to give it to God, I just felt this overwhelming peace over my whole body and in the whole car. And I just knew that was God's presence. Because that's the type of feeling that you can't explain, and you don't really know it until you feel it, because it's supernatural. It's not supposed to be able to be understood. All through Psalms, it's peace that surpasses all understanding, and that's what I felt. So that's the moment that I was saved, when I was 17. And the thing that I want to talk about today is that it's not just that moment took away all my desire for control ever. It's not I just gave it to God and was yeah, I want you to take control of this, and then never struggled with that again. Even after that, I still struggled with the idea of wanting to control my friendship or relationship or situationship with that guy. And what God has been revealing in me for the last 9-10 months is that the root of why I like controlling things, or why in my flesh I want to have control over everything, is because I have felt unprotected, which is really interesting because it's not something I would have ever thought was the reason. And I did realize this through therapy, which is a super great tool. So I would suggest going to therapy because I think everybody needs it. And I was totally the person that was I don't need therapy. I don't have any childhood trauma. I had a pretty good childhood. My parents are great. My siblings are great. I was fine. No, everybody's got stuff. So anyway, I realized that it wasn't just a desire for control, but a desire for protection. And I will explain. Because basically, I wasn't just trying to control one relationship. I was trying to control work and school and all my relationships, including friendships and family relationships. It bled into everything. And over the last, how old am I? 5 years? Since 17? I'm 22. The last 5 years. God has been really kind to me and has not just been hey, these are all of the areas you need to surrender control in at once. It's been a very gradual thing that I've been able to submit something after something after something to God. And I'm assuming we'll never finish. But I think I just assumed that I wanted to control things because I wanted to control things, that I'm just a control freak. It's like, oh, that's just how I am, whatever. But it's actually from hurt. So, one thing you have to know about me is I don't like feelings. And I never have. If you heard laughing, that was Christian laughing at me. Which, let me shout out Christian, because we became friends when I was 16, and he is a large part of why I became a Christian when I did. Because all throughout that rough year, he was the one that I was friends with that continuously pointed me back to God. So that's Christian. And he's the one that helps me do all the things with podcast stuff. So he's the one that's laughing in the back pretty regularly. So anyway, I don't like feelings, and I never have. I think for a long time I blamed my childhood on that, and that's really just not fair, because I could be like, yeah, it's because I was an oldest sibling and I took over like the leadership roles and all this stuff. I can blame whoever I want to blame on the fact that I don't like feelings, but it just doesn't matter. Like, it's the whole nature versus nurture argument of eons. The thing is, God makes people a specific way, and the enemy will try and destroy that any way possible. I know that God made me with a leadership personality, and then the enemy tried to turn that into hyper-controlling. Or I know that God made me to be independent in a healthy way, and Satan tried to turn that into hyper-independence. And like, I know that God made me to be able to think well and to think rationally. And the enemy turned that into being like, well, then you don't need your feelings and they actually suck. Which isn't true. And it's taken me a really long time to deal with that. So for a long time, I just ignored my feelings and considered them as a weakness. When that's not real, because Jesus had feelings and Jesus was anything but weak. So being able to look back at my life has been so interesting to see the emotional side of the way that I was, like why I was who I was. Because what I thought when I was 16 or 17 was strength was just hurt. Like the way that I would purposely come off to people in the persona that I put on myself was a way of self-preservation and not strength. Because to me, I was like, well, if I'm just mean to people and if I'm the one who will stand up to anybody, that's strength, that's power, and no one can see me as weak. When in reality, I was just hurt and I felt unprotected, and I was putting it on myself instead of trusting God to protect me. And the reason that protection was so interesting to me when I started working through this was because in my little brain, I was like, well, I was never like physically hurt as a child. Like, I didn't have some of these stories that so many other people have. But it wasn't about physical protection. It was about emotional protection. And that is just not something that I accounted for. So, all that to say, what I originally assumed was just a desire for control was actually just feeling unprotected, and it bled into my whole life. And then through realizing all of that that's how I interacted with everybody in my life, I realized that that's how I've been interacting with God. And just because I knew truths about God didn't mean I believed them. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've been learning in the last year, that just because I know God is something doesn't mean I actually believe it. So yeah, I knew that God was my protector, like the rock and the redeemer and all these things, but I didn't believe it in a way that it impacted my life with the truth of God's character. And that it's not just a one-time prayer, because I kind of was like, oh, I just realized that I haven't been living as like God is my protector, but now that I know it, I'll be fine. No. So it's not just a one-time thing, which is frustrating for me, because I'm like, well, I just want it to be fixed. And that's just not how it works when you're human. So that's the backstory of how how my testimony came from realizing that I couldn't run my life on my own, that I needed God to be the one in control, and that my reason for wanting to control everything all the time was actually not from just wanting to control it, but from feeling unprotected emotionally. And this is how I've been working through it with God. So at first, I had to do a lot of work with my past of like, okay, these are all the people that made me feel unprotected or made me feel like I had to protect myself from them in an emotional way, not a physical way, because that's where my problems lay. But I had to one by one give them to God and forgive each of those people for hurting me, which is easier said than done because it's a daily surrender. Like when you forgive someone, it's not because you feel it, it's because you're choosing not to hold it against them anymore. And that doesn't mean that you can't have boundaries, because forgiving someone doesn't mean that you just let them run over you over and over and over again. But it's letting God avenge you and not you avenging yourself. So that was a lot of like, okay, God, I'm choosing to forgive them and not hold this against them, and I want to give it to you. And then every time a thought came up where it was like, hey, can you believe that they did that to you? It's like, nope, I'm choosing to give this to God. And it's a continuous thing when you catch those thoughts. And then eventually the feelings start to follow, at least for me. And there are definitely still people where it's still hard and it's going to take a long time. But that's how I've been working through forgiving the people that have hurt me and trusting that God is who he says he is. Because if I believe the Bible and if I believe God and he says that he's going to avenge me, then I have to trust that. And that's like a mental thing of like every time I have those thoughts, counteracting them of like, no, God says that he's going to do it. And just because it's not on my timeline in the way that I want to see it doesn't mean that he's not going to follow through. So that was one of the first things that I had to work through. And then after that, I realized that I wasn't just believing lies or not believing who God said he was in certain areas, but I was also believing lies about the way he looks at me, that like I wasn't worthy of being protected, or that he doesn't actually care about my feelings, which I've talked about in another podcast. But that I kind of assumed, I guess, that because I didn't care about my feelings, that God wouldn't care about my feelings, and that I just had to work really hard to prove to God that I loved him and that he didn't care about how I felt with the things that he asked me to do, which isn't true. He does care about how you feel, because Jesus wept and Jesus cried when Lazarus died, even though he knew he was going to raise him from the dead. Like Jesus still was able to grieve, and he felt happiness and he felt anger in a righteous way. Like Jesus gave us permission to have feelings. And Psalms actually helped me a lot. I'll make a list of all the Psalms that I've been reading in the last couple months that have been super impactful, but 18 is one of my favorites. It's pretty giant. So, okay, Psalm 18 was one of the first ones that I read that I was like, oh my gosh, this is God telling me that he's protecting me. The whole thing is, let me see how many verses. It's large. It's 50 verses. But it basically is talking about how God is like your strength, the rock, the fortress, the deliverer, where you take refuge, all these things. And then it talks about like his voice thundering in the heavens and sending out lightning, and basically just how big and powerful God is, and that that's the God you have on your side. I think the thing that just really struck me is that the battle cry side of God is not the one that I'm going to experience. Like the fighting the enemies God is not the one I'm going to experience, because he's going to be fighting our enemies. Because when you walk with God, you have the same enemies as God. So he's going to avenge all those people that are with him. Like he's going to be the one that goes out and makes sure that there's justice. Like it doesn't have to be me, because he's going to do it perfectly and righteously, and then I don't have to worry about it. But Psalm 18 also talks about how much he delights in his people. It says in verse 19, he brought me out into a broad place. He rescued me because he delighted me. Like God actually likes taking care of us. It's not just because he has to, but he loves us and delights in us and actually enjoys us And that was something that was really hard for me to wrap my head around, because I'd been working so hard on just making sure that I was doing all the right things to be deserving of that when I don't have to. All I have to do is receive his love. And then the reason that I do the right thing is because I love him and because I want to obey him, not because I have to earn it, which is really like fundamental things when you become a Christian, that they tell you like, yeah, it's not works-based. It's just because God loves you. But like I've said, there's a difference between knowing and believing. And I realized over the last year, there's a lot of things that I wasn't believing. That he actually does care about me. He does want to protect me, and he cares about all my feelings. And I feel like the biggest thing, I'll make a list of all the Psalms that I have been loving. But the biggest thing that I feel like God made clear to me, and that I want to make clear on this podcast for anybody else who has had the same struggles or thoughts or feelings, is that nobody actually cares as much as God cares about you. No one ever, ever, ever will. And he's not like your ex-boyfriend, and he's not like your dad who left, and he's not like your friend who abandoned you or ghosted you. He's not that. He says that he's never going to forsake you, he's never going to leave you, and that he cares about you. And God doesn't lie. Like, that's actually, he is who he says he is. Even though all these people that are in your life have lied and aren't proving to be who they say they're going to be, God isn't one of those people. He's perfect. And the thing is, like, I lived my life scared that if people knew the real me, they wouldn't like me anymore. And God already knew. He already knew all of the things that are in my head and all the things I've ever done, all my deepest, darkest secrets, and he never left. I didn't even have to say it. And he still stayed. He's not going to talk about me behind my back. He's not going to lie to me. He's not going to not follow through, because he's perfect and he's God and he cares and he loves me. And that's crazy. But yeah, that's what I'm working on believing and actually living my life because that's true. And in the security of that. So I don't have to worry when people hurt me because my confidence isn't in people. I don't have to worry when people lie to me because their trust isn't the only thing that's in the world. So when other people don't follow through and everything falls apart, it doesn't matter, because the thing that I am building my house on, which is God, isn't going to fall apart. So yeah, that's me. But yeah, God actually cares. He protects you. He's not going to hurt you like other people have, because he's God. And that's really all I have to say. So I'll be doing these once a month, so every 4 weeks. I'll post one of just me, and it'll be similar to this. I would assume like around the 20-minute mark, mostly about things that I'm learning and things that God is teaching me. And I hope this is helpful to someone, and I pray that it is. And if you have questions, feel free to ask. If you're listening on Spotify, the video version's on YouTube. And if you're on YouTube and you want to listen to just the audio version, that'll be on Spotify. There you go. So yeah, thank you all for listening. And feel free to reach out if you have questions, comments, or concerns. Bye.